first realize that Minnesota had an identity problem. I was 18 and had just arrived for college orientation in Massachusetts, surrounded primarily from students from the two coasts. And for the first time, I was hearing what other people thought of a place that I was proud to call my home state. And they essentially knew three things. You have that big mall, right? You hang out there a lot? No, not really, I would say. Did you guys have that wrestler as your governor? He's crazy. Well, yes, I would have to admit, but we prefer to call him eccentric. It's pretty much cold there all the time, right? Well, not all the time. Also, the movie Fargo had just come out, and my classmates basically assumed that that was a National Geographic documentary. Here we are, 17 years later. Our winters are still cold, we still have the Mall of America, but at least we've upgraded our governor since then. That was for you, Dad. And I promise that's as political as my talk is going to get. I was born and raised in Minneapolis, a fifth-generation Minnesotan. I loved growing up here, whether it was time spent outdoors in the Boundary Waters, visits to our world-class museums, or playing hockey all winter long. I know how great this part of the country is. But over time, I've come to realize that many other people in other parts of the country have no idea. In fact, they don't know much about us at all. A few years ago, I took a trip with my wife through Scandinavia. I came home certainly impressed by everything we'd seen, tasted, experienced, but also frustrated. So many of Scandinavia's strengths were familiar to me, and that's because they were Minnesota's strengths too. And yet our part of the country continued to go overlooked. But we weren't really part of a defined region, and that was the problem. We were flyover country, part of the big nebulous Midwest, a catch-all for the states left over after all the other regions of the country had been established. Even the term Midwest reflects an East Coast perspective of the country. There was a time when Minnesota was part of the western frontier, and thus the northwest of the known United States. As the frontier pushed on to the west coast, we were left just midway to the west, or the Midwest. Or even worse for Minnesota, the upper Midwest. With each additional relative modifier, Minnesota's geographic identity got weaker. And this is, just to be clear, I'm not anti-Midwest. Rather, this is about being pro-Minnesota and just longing for an identity that better defines and reflects our region. We've been letting the rest of the country define us for far too long, and they certainly haven't been doing us any favors. Do you remember when the New York Times last fall did a roundup of Thanksgiving recipes from around the country? Do you remember what ours was? They proclaimed Minnesota's favorite traditional side dish to be grape salad. It was just another example of someone from another part of the country not knowing all that much about Minnesota and telling our story inaccurately. Although it was the Times' gaffe, it was our problem. We needed to take control of the narrative. What if, just as the Scandinavian countries have their own identity as Northern or Nordic Europe, what if Minnesota and the surrounding states, what if we had our own region as the Northern US? Or to be concise, the North. It seemed like a promising idea, and after all, it was really nothing new. Minnesota's motto has been the Star of the North since 1861, right there on the state flag. But we needed to test the idea, so we did the obvious thing. We made hats. We figured that if people liked the idea of Minnesota as the North instead of the Midwest, they could buy a hat and show their pride. It was really that simple. We made 150 hats in the fall of 2013, figured that that would last us certainly through Christmas. They sold out in 4 days. And what I found remarkable is that we really didn't have to sell the hats or the idea at all. People just got it, instinctively, intuitively. It was as if we'd all been thinking the same thing, but it just took a little spark to start what has become a movement. There are now thousands of people showing their northern pride, not just here in Minnesota, but across the country, even around the world. And what started as a very simple idea and a basic test has become much bigger than hats. Here's why I think the North is working. First, the North is accurate. You're getting a laugh, okay? state in the contiguous US, period. That's not branding, it's just geography. And there's something timeless, something permanent about geography. This isn't about trying to invent a new region of the country, and this isn't about trying to make Minnesota seem better than it is or something it's not. It's about rediscovering a region that's always been here, hiding in plain sight, and telling our own stories to the rest of the country. Next, the North is authentic. A little while ago, I actually learned that Minneapolis considered an identity as the North years ago, but decided against it because community leaders were worried that it would sound too cold and would scare people away. Yes, the North sounds cold, but Minnesota is cold, at least for a good part of the year. And it's one of the first things that comes to mind when people think of our state, whether we like it or not. So let's own it. There's this idea in boxing called stepping into the punch, and the strategy goes that if you know you're going to get hit, you want to step into the punch, which takes some of the power out of it. If you try to lean away from the punch, it actually lands with more force. Leaning away from our cold winters is a losing strategy, and it always has been. Lastly, the North is specific. The Midwest, as we knew it, was so vast, and its states so diverse that they couldn't really collectively stand for anything. By focusing in on this region as the North, Minnesota and the surrounding states can be known for the qualities they actually share. And that's good for the other states that do self-identify as the Midwest, as it makes their identity more specific too. Everyone wins. Since we first started this conversation, we've seen incredible momentum as more and more people have embraced this idea of the North and made it their own. And the press has taken notice, first locally and then nationally. My favorite here is this one by the Chicago Tribune. They took this North idea very personally, and their response was incredibly patronizing. It's one of the moments when I really knew we were onto something. But perhaps my favorite example of how far the North has come and where I think it can go is Minnesota's upcoming Super Bowl, and I've got a little sneak preview for you. Take a look.
We're a land of innovators, creators, scientists, and risk takers. We have thriving arts, theater, and music scenes. We have world-class restaurants. We consistently rank among the healthiest, most active communities in the nation and inspire people around the globe. And we're unlike anyone else who has ever hosted the Super Bowl. We are the North, the bold North, where working hard meets playing harder. Where we don't just face the weather, we embrace it. Where our bold way of life amazes everyone who experiences it. And for 10 days in February 2018, that number takes a sharp turn north. Super Bowl 52.
Minnesota Super Bowl is not just that they're going to be using the North as really a central theme for the identity of the Super Bowl, but even if you look before that and how the bid committee pitched Minnesota as a potential site to the NFL, after decades of trying to downplay and hide from our reputation as cold and hide from the cold itself inside of skyways and indoor shopping malls, they actually led with the cold, and in doing so, they stepped into the punch. And there's no denying, of course, that in February 2018, it's going to be cold in Minnesota. And so they argue that our cold is actually an asset and a differentiating feature. And that if given the opportunity, we were going to show the rest of the world how winter is done. And it worked. So it turns out that maybe the cold isn't one of our biggest liabilities after all. Maybe it's one of the best things about Minnesota. You can see that changing attitude in events like the U.S. Pond Hockey Championship, the Locust cross-country ski races, events that couldn't happen without our cold, snowy winters, and events that don't happen anywhere else in America. You'll only find them right here in the North. The cold also toughens us up, makes us have to work a little harder to thrive, and that's actually a really good thing. Cold creates challenges, and challenges foster creativity. And that's not just my opinion. If you look at the 2014 Global Innovation Index, of the top 10 countries in the world in terms of the innovation of their economies, 8 are located in northern cold climate regions. And of the top 20, you'll find all 5 Nordic countries. Nationally, Minnesota has long outperformed as a state among its peers and continues to do so. And here are just some of the recent accolades that our state has received. This is what a changing narrative looks like. Now, of course, embracing the North didn't all of a sudden make Minnesota great. A lot of the qualities being recognized here have been foundational to Minnesota for generations. And this is not to say that our state and our region don't face important challenges, because they do. But the North gives us a new platform to tell our story and talk about what makes this part of the country unique. It also allows others to view the region with a fresh set of eyes and see us for who we really are and what this state really is. I'd like to close with a question that I've heard quite a bit along the way, which is, why does any of this matter? Why should Minnesota even care what other places think of us? Here's my answer. As the owner of a small business, I'm constantly on the lookout for the very best people to join our team. That's not always easy. If you look around the state, across the country, even around the world, there's a fierce competition taking place for talent. Young people can move and work anywhere, and with them go important new ideas. Right now, at this very moment, some recent college graduate is trying to decide where he or she wants to go and take a job, start a career, maybe even start their own company. And Minnesota's not going to do very well if they're imagining us as log cabins, as my college classmate did. Or worse, if we're not even on their radar at all. Minnesota is rightly proud to have 17 Fortune 500 companies, second most per capita in the nation. And a lot of those companies are homegrown. However, if you look more closely, the average age of Minnesota's Fortune 500 companies is 90 years old. And the most recent one founded here was in 1977. Do you know what the life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company is today? 15 years and falling. The future success of our state is not guaranteed. We need to make sure that Minnesota remains a place that both produces and attracts the very best and brightest, because it's that talent that's going to drive our state forward in years to come. I firmly believe that the North is an idea worth spreading. The fight for that bright young talent is happening right now, all around us. So let's tell our story, the real story of this place. Let's have the courage and the confidence to compete globally, because we have a lot to offer. And let's be in it to win it, because the consolation prize is grape salad.